just a little bit. Sounds good. Okay, now we're good to go. So welcome everybody to this month's Charlotte Craft CMS Developers Meetup Group. We come to you monthly from Charlotte, North Carolina with various craft development topics. Hopefully, if you're listening live or watching this recording after the fact, you will get some knowledge from this. Are these advancing? All right, so first, want to give a big shout out and thank you to Soulspace. Soulspace is a full stack development agency out of the Bay Area of San Francisco, and they do lots of craft development, some Laravel, some Node stuff, but most importantly, and they're most known by the two most popular craft plugins in the plugin store, Freeform and Calendar. I've worked with Soulspace on a contract basis for probably going on about 5 years now. They are a proud food sponsor, so all of the food that we feed everybody in person with is courtesy of Soulspace. Thank you tonight to our host, Ray Ward. Ray Ward is a full-service agency here in the Charlotte area, specializing in the home and building categories for brands. It's been serving the community and as an agency for over 40 years. So thank you to Lucas and the crew for hosting us tonight. All right, so our agenda tonight and our topic is about establishing security in your craft CMS development. So securing your application, your craft application should be really top of mind when you're planning, implementing, but if it's not and you've already got an established application, you also can add it in after release, and we're going to talk about some ways that you can maintain security throughout the application's lifecycle. We will review some common vulnerabilities in CMS systems, some that are unique to Craft and Yii, and how you can start or update your application for a solid footing in security. We also have two remote guests. One is Ben Croker from Put Your Lights On. He recorded a really good video about security at the application level. And then we have Nevin Lynne from Arcustech. He's CEO of Arcustech, who's a specialty craft host, and he's here live remotely from the Midwest, I think, right? Right, Nevin?
Yep. Minneapolis.
And he'll be speaking more about security at the server level. So the topics we'll go through tonight, why security is important, what security aspects that Craft gives you for free, and then we'll start rolling through protection at the configuration level, the application level, the front end level, the server level, and then we'll talk about ways that you can maintain security as the lifecycle of your project goes on. We'll highlight a couple helpful Craft plugins, and then we'll do a quick wrap up and I'll share some links for everybody. So why is security important? So 4 main reasons why website and web application security is very important in 2022. First and foremost is protecting your customers. So you're the owner and protector of your customers' information, whether it's username, passwords, credit card numbers, other payment information, to really any number of different sensitive information like medical records or banking histories or credit information or even purchase histories. And we've all heard the horror stories of people purchasing like pregnancy tests and then getting coupons emailed them to about, you're having a baby and stuff, and that's sensitive stuff. So, you're really on the hook to protect and safeguard that information. Customers are really looking to you to do that when they share information with you. Second most important thing is protecting your assets. And so for 90% of business websites, the website is their number one source of customer leads. A simple intrusion could end up costing you $10,000 to $100,000 to even multiple millions of dollars to mitigate, whether it be signing up for new hosting because your host has dumped you because of your lack of security policies, expensive risk mitigations that you have to put in place to find the vulnerability in your code and fix it, lawsuits, which are, even more expensive and scary. And in the case of an intrusion with computer and network systems, you could even have to buy new physical software and equipment if something gets hacked. So super important. Number three is protecting your reputation. So we all know and could probably within 5 minutes think of a company in the last 5 years that is known now for having hacks. And I can think of like Capital One, for example. If you have a Capital One account, then all of your information got hacked and shared out on the dark web, which is, super awesome for a credit card company. So the potential customers, existing customers, they all view you as a trusted name in your industry. So why would you risk that reputation with a preventable security intrusion? Tonight, we'll talk about how you can work to prevent that. Fourth, and not in any order of importance, but pretty important to your CFO, is preventing loss of revenue. So just the simple fact of system downtime for security intrusions can cost you more than just the loss of your incoming revenue during that period. It can really cause you to lose trust with your customers and risk continued or new customer revenue in the long run. When your site is hacked, potentially added to different blacklists, your customers won't be able to reach the products or services you offer. So as we can see, it's extremely important to make sure that you are keeping your application as secure as possible. So a non-comprehensive list of possible vulnerabilities in today's web applications. Top of mind for me is web cache poisoning. There has been a couple instances in some Craft plugins where this has become an issue and quickly mitigated, of course, with an update. But cache poison is a type of cyber attack where attackers can insert fake information into either a DNS cache or a static web cache for the purpose of harming users. And a DNS cache or a spoof, the attacker can divert traffic from a legitimate server to a malicious or dangerous server, and they can perpetrator enters false information such as a doctored website address into the DNS cache, which results in redirection of users to a wrong or unexpected dangerous website. Pretty common when it comes to PayPal. We've all heard of phishing and spoofing attacks, but just making sure that your application is as secure as possible for your actual static HTML cache is important as well, because that's another vulnerability that can come up. A cross-site scripting attack or an XSS attack is a type of injection where a malicious like JavaScript is injected into an otherwise trusted website. They occur when an attacker uses a web application to send malicious code, usually in the form of a browser-side script to a different end user. These succeed quite frequently and are widespread and occur anywhere, or potentially could occur anywhere that a user inputs from a form or any type of input, and you are not validating or encoding it. Kind of an amateur mistake, but everybody can go through it. The attacker can send malicious scripts and access any of the user's cookies, session tokens, sensitive information retained by the browser, and use that. They can also rewrite the content of an HTML page. Scary. All right, a CSRF or cross-site request forgery attack. That is an attack that lets a hacker send requests as a different authenticated user or trick the authenticated user to send a request unwillingly. Many CSRF attacks against web forms depend on two things. One, spoofing, which would be social engineering a victim to click on an attacker's link with an email or a shared link, or applications that don't validate the origin of a form submission as legitimate. Luckily, we'll talk about this in a little bit, Craft enables CSRF tokens by default unless you explicitly turn them off. So you've got a leg up there on security. If an attacker gets somebody to click a link that does an HTTP post to a password change form, the attacker can compromise the victim's account. This is the #1 way that people's Facebooks get hacked. They get a cool, share your kitten pictures with your grandma, and here, I'm going to email you this link. Just put in your password and we'll hook it up right now. Happens all the time, every day. The last one we'll talk about is SQL injection attacks. So those are vulnerabilities that allow an attacker to interfere with the queries that an application makes to its database. Very important in Craft because we do a ton of queries to the database. So it allows an attacker to view data they are not normally able to retrieve. This might be data belonging to other users, passwords that the application itself needs to access. Usually in these cases, an intrusion like this, they're just going to wipe out data. They're going to look for valuable stuff that they can take, and then after that, they're going to clear your database and delete all the tables and your site's down. So definitely scary. So what kind of security does Craft give us for free? We all hear that Craft is better than WordPress because it's secure and security is top of mind. So, whoa, went back too far, sorry. I am one slide ahead. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to keep up here on my own screen. So Craft has a pretty robust set of security details and policies out of the box. And I'm just going to go through some of their marketing information here. They go through regular code base and dependency security reviews, both internally and by trusted security experts. Craft and Yii use the PDO library for all database queries, and any dynamic values are parameterized, and that really helps prevent SQL injection attacks. Craft validates sensitive cookie data using a private key that you set in your configuration to ensure that any request cookies that come across the pipeline have not been tampered with. Additionally, Craft uses CSRF token validation by default to prevent CSRF attacks unless you turn it off, which you really shouldn't do that. Twig automatically escapes HTML entities that are dynamically output by default, and that helps prevent XSS attack vectors. Our WYSIWYG rich text fields, whether it's Redactor or the other package that I can't think of the name of right now, have HTML purification turned on by default. So if your client comes in and pastes in, some untrusted JavaScript or information, then it's going to be sanitized and serialized. Same with untrusted SVGs, another way that you can accidentally put code in place that you don't intend to. These are also sanitized with SVG sanitizer on upload, or if they're used within markup. Uploaded file names are cleaned. Images are resaved on upload to ensure any malicious code embedded within the image is stripped away. Kind of a rare attack, but it does happen. Sensitive information such as passwords and security keys are always redacted from error messages and logs. Craft verifies any new email addresses on user accounts before accepting them by default. They temporarily lock user accounts after too many unsuccessful login attempts by default. You also can configure that to a lower threshold if you need to. Craft stores your user agent string and identity cookies by default to help avoid session cookie hijacks. They will deny any request to start a session that doesn't present a user agent string or an IP address, and that prevents direct socket connections, which are really hard to hack, but can potentially happen. Like if somebody was sitting out in the parking lot, happened to connect to the local Wi-Fi and picked up your testing environment or something. Craft requires PHP 7.2.5 plus in Craft 3, PHP 8 plus in Craft 4, both of which have really mitigated a lot of vulnerabilities in the older versions of PHP. And last, Craft uses OpenSSL to generate cryptological, secure email verification codes, password reset tokens, and other strings. So that's a bunch of stuff to ingest there. most importantly, and one of the most proud things of Craft is its total CVE listed vulnerabilities. So CVE is just kind of a list of known vulnerabilities, whether they've been addressed in an updated version and what the risks are. Currently, Craft has 21 open CVE items, all of which have been addressed with a Craft update. So they've just been listed as lower versions of 3.5, 3.6, etc. In contrast, WordPress has currently 4,690 CVEs open. Drupal has 1,034 CVEs open. So proof's in the pudding here that the Craft team, Pixel and Tonic, really takes security seriously and will hopefully mitigate any new vulnerabilities quickly with an update. So let's start going through some strategies here with protection at the configuration level, which I would consider the base level, setting up a site or editing an existing site's configuration. So 1 second, I'll get some. So to start with, never run dev mode on production. I have been guilty of this in the past, forgetting to turn dev mode off, and then had the client come to me and say, hey, my 404 page is rendering a bunch of code. Oops. So when dev mode is turned on, full stack trace errors are going to be exposed to the front end on any 500 or 400 pages. Helpful to us, probably not what you want to expose to customers or anybody that's looking for, malicious intent. So there are two ways that I approach this, depending on how I have the configuration set up. First example here is checking an environment variable per environment that you would set to a Boolean, either true or false for dev mode. You can set that in the configuration. Or second example to the right is if you had more of the old school configuration stack that is compartmentalized to the different environments within the config file, and then you would just set dev mode either true globally and false to environments that you didn't want it to, or the vice versa. You would set it false and then only set it true in dev, which is generally what I do if I come across an older site. I would prefer always to set the dev mode within the environment file as a variable, and we'll talk about environment variables here in just a little bit. Just feels like a safer option. You could even improve on the first option here with a tertiary statement and set it to false by default if you did not happen to have that environment variable set in your environment file per environment. So, all right, second configuration thing, you should always leave CSRF tokens turned on and use them on all inbound forms. If you are using a package like Formy or Freeform that we've talked about at other meetups, those are going to come for free out of the box. They're going to use them automatically unless you specifically have a config setting that says turn them off, and you really should never do that. If you are baking your own forms, like in the case of commerce or something like that, then you see here I've got a highlighted box within your form. You can just include the CSRF input tag, and that's going to give you a fresh CSRF token out of the box. The only exception to that is if you are statically caching pages, either with the Craft cache tag or with Blitz or a similar plugin like that. In those cases, you need to use some JavaScript to interject fresh CSRF tokens to those statically cached pages, or your forms are going to work for a little bit until that token expires, and then they're never going to work again. So, all right, something that I always forget to do until I launch the site is changing your admin path with the CP trigger option to something that's a little bit more obscure than admin. And this leads into the concept of security by obscurity, not something that you should ever depend on, but just a little step in the right direction. You're going to get probed all the time for WP_admin. You're going to look in your traffic logs and see a lot of requests to that. You're also going to see a lot of requests to admin because that's a well-known default Craft admin login URL. So generally try to change that either with an environment variable like you see on the left, or just a straight config variable on the right, to something that you and the client will know, but nobody else is going to know. And this is an example of a yoga site that they have Yoga CMS as their admin screen. And on that same token, and I haven't done this on any sites, but you also can set your PHP session name to a unique variable that can be obscure, and that's going to increase your obscurity and security by obscurity. I just noticed this recently, so I'm probably going to circle back to some sites and just add it in. It's 5 minutes to deploy it, and just another step in the right direction. But the variable is called PHP session name. All right. One of the headers that gets sent by Craft by default is the powered by header, and it just basically outputs what you see below here in the HTML headers is X powered by Craft CMS. Generally, this is another security by obscurity approach. Not really any change here. You just kind of give it a leg up on nobody's going to know what platform you're using, so that could reduce the amount of probing attacks that you could get there. One note is that SEOmatic will also send an X powered by header. So if you are using SEOmatic, buried in the SEOmatic settings is a checkbox to turn off X powered by header, and generally you just want to turn that off just to decrease automated probing attacks. All right, so I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but generally you should be setting values and sensitive credentials like database logins, email logins, third-party API keys. You should really be keeping those out of your repository so that they're not tracked. The risk of somebody getting access to the repository and getting your database login is high. Not as high as you would think, but it is out there. So I would say almost all of Craft's configuration and most of your high quality third-party plugins in the plugin store will allow you to use environment variables in admin settings, as well as within your Craft settings for like database credentials. So I just pulled an example for a site that I've been working on recently where we're using S3 for upload. So in my environment variable over here, I have two variables. One is S3 key and one is the secret. And then you can see within my asset volume settings here, I'm referencing those environment variables. The key is just having a $sign in front of it, and it'll parse automatically if that environment variable is in place. One of the bonuses to doing this is that if you're using two buckets, one for dev or staging and one for production, then you can have those keys unique to each environment in its site environment file and not have to change anything in your Craft configuration, because it's just going to grab whatever the value is for that. Most importantly, do not therefore track your environment file, which I've seen in some repos recently, which really just negates the whole purpose of using an environment file. The idea here is that it's only stored on the server. Depending on your company's security policies, you may only be able to get access to it if you SSH into the server or FTP into the server or something like that. But the idea here is that you're keeping sensitive information out of places that potentially could get accessed by malicious people. All right, project config. This could really turn into a talk of its own, but generally, I encourage the use of a project config workflow in the deployment workflow and development workflow for all Craft sites. Project config is very stable and solid these days. You rarely run into any merge conflicts, but the idea is that any schema, which would include fields, channel settings, and other various settings within Craft, are only written locally on a developer's machine, writes to a whole bunch of YAML files that you do track within the repo, and then you push and sync those between developer machines as well as sync to remote environments. The catch there is that you always want to turn off settings access to those remote environments where you are applying schema changes. And that just also gives you a leg up in case, one of your admin users' username and password gets leaked and somebody is able to just literally log into the control panel. They're not going to have settings access, and Craft's going to block you from getting access to that on the remote environment, because you don't want to be mutating the settings or the schema on that remote environment. So just another, I don't know if you would really consider this security by obscurity, but kind of. And of course, you could quickly, this is a good pattern that I stick to, is that if production is the app environment files environment key, then it's production. If it's not, then it's dev. And sometimes I have staging in here as well. And then I just reference that global variable in my config is dev for allow admin changes. That changes dynamically, will be true for local, potentially true for staging if we're testing something, but generally remote environments, that's going to be set to false and you will not have settings access. All right, moving on to the next level of protection, which would be at our application level. And we're talking here about plugins and specifically to here Composer. So with Craft 3, we got introduced to the fun of Composer. Just like Node Package Manager, Composer is a PHP package manager, and kind of had a love-hate relationship with Composer at the start because it really, really quickly does a whole lot of stuff and you don't really get to see what's going on. And when something bugs out, it's very tertiary when it comes to its debug statements, and you really sometimes don't know what's going on. You're just going to have to start over. But Composer in itself is really awesome because especially with Composer 2, which has been out now for about a year, they really took a deep dive on hardening the security. And I'm just going to quickly go through some of their marketing speak here. All Composer packages are vendor namespace. So dependency confusion attacks do not happen with Composer because all of them are going to have a unique name, and Packagist, which is the online repository for packages, won't allow a different account to claim a vendor name once it's published under a vendor name. That really leads to last year's NPM package attack, where somebody ended up claiming ownership of a well-used and widely distributed NPM package that was buried as a dependency in a lot of different other packages, and put malicious code up there. Luckily, NPM caught it pretty quickly, invalidated it, but it still got out and it still got applied to some websites. So there still was some vulnerability there. Won't happen with Composer. Security is built in with Packagist and Composer. Things like requiring HTTPS. You have to have two-factor authentication in Packagist. The entirety of Composer source code is open source. Lock files, which are what get written each time you install or update a Composer package to lock in the version that you're using. Stores absolute URLs to all packages using a dependency tree so that there's no risk of a relative URL getting changed potentially maliciously, and guarantees reproducible vendor directories. All the packages are hosted on a VCS. NPM actually hosts the actual code, but Packagist does not store the actual code. It stores the target URL and meta information about the packages, and almost entirety of public Composer packages are submitted to, or that are submitted to packages are hosted on either GitHub, GitLab, or a similar version control system. That provides transparency because the actual package contents can be reproduced and verified anytime, not coming from some mysterious server that you don't really know if it can be verified. Self-updates are cryptographically verified. Each time you update or go through a Composer self-update, the download executable file is cryptographically verified for integrity. If it's not proven to be untampered, then Composer will not download the FAR file. I've actually seen this happen in person with a private Composer package repo who a developer shared with somebody for a maintainer, and that maintainer's machine got attacked and somebody put malicious code up there. I had the client, it was another development team, came to me and said, hey, for some reason, Composer's stopping when it's trying to update this package. It took us about 3 days to track down what happened and realized that that maintainer's machine had spyware or whatever you want to call it on there and had added in some code to that repo and was getting downloaded too. Great. Luckily, it was a private package and it was only used by that particular vendor. So it didn't get distributed anywhere else. But that was kind of scary. So that was pretty awesome that Composer actually stopped that from happening. Root user warning. So if you've ever tried to run any Composer commands as root, it's going to give you a warning that that's a really bad idea. In Composer 2, it's leveled up to a prompt that you have to manually override before the Composer command is executed. And that's just to make sure that the ownership of those files that are getting written by Composer and the user permissions of that user are not at the root level, which has, usually in most cases, pretty high, executable limits within the system. And Composer repositories are canonical by default. And this is one of the most important changes in Composer 2, that when using multiple repositories, if a package is found in the repository, Composer will not look for any other versions that may be declared. This mitigates the threat when an attacker publishes a higher version of a given package and tries to trick Composer to download the package from a repository that the attacker potentially controls. That actually happened also with a node package that was widely used maybe a year and a half ago. Scary. We all know that dependency trees are enormous, and we're putting a lot of trust into developers that are maintaining all of this Composer information and node information. So these help us rest assured at night that the code that we're using is going to be as safe as possible. However, there are some additional security options that you can configure for Composer. There is a package called Security Advisories, and it is a Composer meta package that really has no functional code, but on its own has a Composer JSON file that will prevent packages and package versions with known vulnerabilities from being installed. Whoops, I had a typo there. So if you put that into your Composer dependency tree, it's going to run all the time and make sure that the packages that are getting downloaded automatically have not been, exposed or have a vulnerability in it. You should always try to run Composer scripts first with a dry run flag. It's just going to go through and show you the package and dependency list being installed, but it's not going to make any changes. It's also an easy way to see if something's going to bug out before you end up breaking your production site. It supports require, install, update, and remove commands. It also has a no scripts option that all work for those, as well as create project and dump autoload commands that will prevent any scripts declared in the package's composer.json file from being run. And always really take a look at the dependencies that you're using on your production environment and make sure that if you have removed or uninstalled a package, that it's actually removed from your Composer JSON file, and make sure not to include any development packages with the no dev option whenever you're installing a package. that you're not going to use on production. And that would be something like a debug library or Ray, like I use Spady Ray a lot, and I don't want to run that on production. So I make sure to, install it on new projects with the no dev flag. That will install with an existing composer lock file, but it does not fetch or auto load any entries that are listed as required dev. You can also do that with auto load for any auto loaded classes from a module or something like that. All right, even more simple is making sure that your permissions and your directory structure are cutting the mustard, as they say. So you always want to keep your craft files out of the document root. The only things that you should have in your document root are the things that you actually are assured are going to be safe to share to the public, because they're going to have more than likely public access. That should be your compiled front end code, possibly your htaccess file, favicons, things like that, but that's basically it. And the main index.php file that Craft needs to bootstrap its routing and its application. So on the left, I've got a good example of an existing project where you will see we have images, CP resources, assets, our favicons, and a couple SVGs, and that's basically all that's in the public root. Everything else that is needed for the Craft application is outside of the public root, and that's just smart directory structuring. On the right, I just did a quick LSL of a directory to kind of show you the recommended like write permissions and ownership of different directories and things like that within a usual Craft application. You can see our web directory has that's probably 775. Our vendor directory 775, and then a lot of the other stuff like the package file, our gulp file and things like that are probably 665, which means nobody's allowed to write to it except for the server. Craft usually will, if you use the Craft build tool to scaffold out your site, it's going to set all the settings and permissions by default. So that's how I usually recommend you start a new Craft project. All right, we'll quickly run through some plugin and module best practices. We're all creating custom modules and custom plugins. If you're really diving into that, you probably know a lot already about using PHP properly, especially in an MVC type pattern. But there are a couple things that can kind of get you when it comes to best practices. So one of the more important things is if your module or plugin has controller methods that you're hitting routes and you need them to be public, then some people will just set the blanket allow anonymous setting as true. Well, that literally allows anonymous public access to every single method within that controller. Even things that you may be labeling as private, which is not really what the intention should be. So with Yii, you can pass an array of the handles of the methods within your controller that you actually do want to be public. Here's a good example of one that we had all of these methods that end up kicking off queue jobs, and we needed to either allow the client to hit these from an HTTP route, which is usually not the best way because you're running into PHP execution limits. But in our case, we had cron jobs that were hitting these queue jobs, and we needed these controller methods to be public. But I didn't want anything else within the controller file, any of my private methods to be exposed. So we just pass a simple array of the handles, and that's all that Yii is going to allow public access to. Additionally, to get even deeper, this particular application had some controller methods and some services that modified Craft entries, as well as some other sensitive data within the Craft application. So I made sure, this is an example of an actual queue job. method, the first thing that I always do is make sure that require admin is turned on. If you're hitting it from a cron job, then that's gonna be true. If you are trying to hit that from a non-logged in admin user through HTTP, that's going to return false. Yee's going to kick you out at that point and not let it continue. So just another quick safety measure to put in place, especially if you are updating, changing entries. This particular one had some user stuff that was happening. So this was pretty important. Additionally, you can pass an argument to it, which is the handle of a user group. So potentially if you wanted to limit this even further, only allow a logged in editor to run a certain command or something like that, that hit a controller method that hit a service route or something like that, then you could further limit this to a user. Whoops, I didn't even advance the slides. Sorry, I'm running two different slideshows here. So yeah, require admin or require permission with that handle of the user group. Pretty handy. So our first guest tonight is Ben Croker. Ben's pretty well known in the craft community. He's really, really big on security. His Put Your Lights On blog has multiple articles about craft security, which have been extremely insightful as I did research and worked on the information for this presentation. Ben was graceful enough to allow us to listen to about 17 minutes of him talking about best practices in the application realm. Let me see if I can get this to actually play from here.
Thanks, Justin, for having me on and in general for organizing these meetings. So I write about Craft CMS and content management. On my website, you can read these articles, articles. And one of the things that I write a lot about is security. In fact, I have an entire series called Securing Your Craft Site in 2021 and 2022. It's currently a three-part series. These take a lot of time to write, so I'm not putting any pressure on myself. But these are in-depth technical articles that you can go read. Today, I thought I would present what I believe to be the most critical things in terms of general security, and leave the technical stuff to Justin and Nevin. So before I go into that, I wanted to give a little update. I put out this article a couple of weeks ago, and it's about phishing attacks, or more specifically, it's about how to create awareness of phishing attacks and therefore avoid them within your organization or your clients' organizations. Apparently, email is the entry point for 91% of cyber attacks, which is huge. And while to us, phishing attacks may seem quite crude and easy to spot, if they're done effectively, then they can be very effective, and they can really catch even technical people like you and I out quite easily, and the repercussions then are pretty serious. So anyway, just to summarize, in this article, I talk about how important it is to train the people in your organization, the people who use your content management system specifically, either the admins or both the admins and content editors, on phishing scams or phishing attacks. And one of the things that I say you should do is actually show by example. So send an email or communicate in whatever way you want to the people in your organization. And this is what phishing is, but this is what it looks like, and this is how to identify it. And here's what you should do if you receive this. Ideally, report it to the people on the security team or the IT team or whoever is responsible. Now, interestingly, I'm involved in a non-profit organization locally here, and I help them with IT support. And after, well, writing this article was actually part of the training that I did with them. And I did something similar where I communicated to them that this is phishing, this is what it means, this is what it looks like. And this was a couple of weeks back. And what I did just the other day was I actually sent them, and I did like a fire drill. I did a drill where I sent them a mock phishing email and see what the reaction would be. And I thought I'd just show you what I did and show you and also tell you the results. Now you might be wondering, well, what's this got to do with Craft? It has everything to do with Craft because a phishing email or a phishing attack that is successful will essentially, or can essentially give you credentials. And once the user has credentials, they're able to access the CMS, obviously, and everything else that that user has permissions to do. So let me show you how I created this little phishing attack. Now, this non-profit organization that I mentioned, they're running a site on WordPress. Don't get caught up on WordPress. I know we all say, oh, we roll our eyes and we say WordPress is not secure. But we're not talking about the security of WordPress itself. So this could be Craft. It could be really any CMS or any web app with the dashboard. So all I did was actually grabbed, I went to the login page and there are 6 people who have control panel access here. And I just grabbed the WordPress login page and saved the HTML locally, as you see here. And I made it a PHP file and I uploaded this to some dev server that I have somewhere. So the URL is completely different. It's obviously not going to localhost, it's just I'm showing you an example locally. But that is what they would have seen. So not the domain name of the organization, but a different domain name. And I even called it the file fish. That's kind of a warning to see if we can go back up on it. And all I did was I said, well, confirm your account details below. And I sent an email that looked, I basically grabbed the forgot password email that's sent by WordPress. And I changed the wording to just say, WordPress has been updated. You must confirm your account by clicking here. And I sent them a link to my dev server with this phishing form. And this is kind of like old school PHP code. This is real script kiddie style or cowboy style coding. Obviously, you would not want to do this normally, but it was interesting to be using this type of code style again, purely just for purposes of this experiment, of course. And really all I do is inline inside the PHP file, which can go the HTML. I've said, so was a posted value called log and PWD for password where they submitted, and if they were, then I'm going to log the username that was submitted via that form, as well as the password attached to the password because I don't really want to store it in plain text, as well as the timestamp. And then we're just putting that, putting those, basically this line, whatever that results in, into a file called catch.log. And we're just appending it so we don't override what's already exists in there. And then based on that, we say, you know, what we're seeing over here is confirm your account details below because something's been submitted. And once something's submitted, we say, I can show you what that looks like in a moment. And then here's our catch.log file, which is just a directory of. So let's say something comes along and enters a username and password, thinking that this is the actual login page for the CMS. They would log in, and we give them this message saying, letting them know that they fell for a mock phishing attack. However, also letting them know that their credentials were saved, that this was a test, prompting them to go back
Sneaky.
and review if they and see if they can identify the warning signs. And this is the result of my catch.log file. I have the username and a hashed version of the password, simply because I didn't want to collect that in text, but I wanted to make sure that something was submitted. And this would allow me then to send out this mock phishing email and see what happens, see who would actually respond to it. Interestingly, I have the results of that. Now, these people were all told that what they should do in this situation where they spot a phishing email is they should contact me, they should forward it to me and let me know. So I sent out the phishing email, and there was no response. Nothing happened. No one fell for it, but no one contacted me either. And I thought, okay, that's strange. Not what I was expecting, but okay. And then I thought the next day, well, let me just send it again and see what happens. And I sent it again, and again, nothing happened. And my theory, so this caught me off guard. I thought something would happen. I didn't think that nothing would happen. So on day 3, I sent it again for a third time. And 2 people did contact me then, saying, hey, we've received this email. I assume the first time they just ignored it. The second time they thought, oh, it's something I should get to some stage. The third time, though, they were prompted to take action. But then I checked my catch.log file, and boom, I had a result. Somebody had fallen for this phishing attack. And I collected their username and password. And that user happened to be someone who's not a full admin, but they had access to basically all of the content on the entire site. So this is not to shame or blame anybody, and communicated that directly to them as well. This is more about education or creating awareness, and simply creating a more secure environment within the organization. And there are things that we can do in craft to harden craft and security, and there are things that we cannot do within craft, like this. This would be like the soft skills of security, I guess. And creating that awareness, I think, is extremely important. So you can go read this article if you're interested in that, and run your own experiments. But back to what I think are the most important things to understand about security. So in game theory, there are essentially 2 types of games: finite and infinite games. Finite games have defined rules and defined end state that has clear winners or losers, or in the case of a tie, a draw. So things like any board game, like checkers or chess, or football, basketball, tennis, these are all finite games. Some will be played at a finite amount of time, or some will be played until a certain state has been achieved. Infinite games, on the other hand, have both defined and undefined rules, with no clear ending or timeline. So elections, or the economy, or wars, or climate change are all kind of examples of infinite games. And in an infinite game, like I said, there is no winner. The game ends when a participant either lacks the resources to continue, or the will to go on, or for whatever reason cannot continue. And security is an infinite game in that the rules are not clearly defined. And so both hackers and security researchers, or intelligence agencies, we could say, are using tricks and tactics to get ahead of each other. Well, the hackers will almost always be a step ahead. It's the nature of the game, right? And as security is hardened and vulnerabilities are patched, attackers are simultaneously looking for new attack vectors and vulnerabilities and potential breaches. Similarly, in the game of web development, software development that we're in, if you set up and maintain websites, then the goal is to keep those websites up and running. If those sites go down for whatever reason, or if those sites are compromised, or if your server crashes, or God forbid your client fires you, then you've lost. So the question here is, how do you continue playing the game? And I think there are some general rules of thumb that if you follow can really help cover it. So the first one is, don't make yourself an easy target. Easy targets are targets that get hacked first, often because they can be targeted with automated penetration testing tools. Instead, harden your security to the degree of the value of the product or service, or the sensitivity of the data that you're trying to protect. In other words, make your security marginally better than the majority of the others, and you have a much better chance of not being hacked, not being compromised. The second one is possibly the simplest, but possibly the most important thing. Keep software updated. It's an obvious one, but it's one that is deceivingly tricky because updates for software are being released daily, if not hourly. So simply building maintenance contracts and updates, software updates into your process, I think is one of the simplest ways of keeping your site and your client sites secure. So the third one is to put an automated process in place to catch issues early. So time is of the essence when it comes to security. And the sooner you catch a breach, the easier it is to deal with, the easier it is to mitigate damage, and subsequently to recover from that damage. So what does that mean? Putting a process in place to catch those issues could be things like putting warning systems in place. The simplest example of that might be a service that ensures that your site is still online every couple of minutes, or is outputting the correct content, or is testing the forms on your site. The next thing to ask is, are you using an audit trail? In other words, if something does go wrong, are you able to go back and see what events took place on the site leading up to that event and since that event? So there is a plugin called the audit plugin, which does this for you. Craft logs, of course, exist, and perhaps you use an external logging service. It's very important to know how many days worth of logs are being maintained. A lot of those services don't do long-term storage of logs. Ideally, you would catch an issue early, but if you spot an issue a month or 2 months after it's actually happened, then those logs may have been lost. And of course, keeping backups. Daily backups is kind of no-brainer. It's one of the simplest ways of backing up your site's content so that if you have to revert that at any stage, maybe if your site was compromised and data was lost, you can revert to that previous state. And making sure that those backups are preferably off-site and testing that they actually can be restored. Another thing I suggest you do is run security drills similar to what I showed you, but perhaps more technical. For example, what would happen if all of the site's content was lost, or if the site was compromised and we lost access to it? And being able to see, would we be able to recover from this? Would we be able to determine what went wrong? Would we be able to restore the missing content and the missing access? And would we be able to not only recover from it, but learn from it and be able to refine our process going forward? And together with that goes training your organizations or your clients' organizations, users, on basic security practices, such as identifying and reporting phishing emails, which in my opinion is possibly the most important thing that you could train them on after simply how to use the CMS. So that's it from me. I will hand it back to Justin, and of course Nevin is welcome information as well. So I look forward to hearing what they have to say, and thank you for having me on. Bye.
Awesome. That was great. Thank you, Ben, for sharing all of your insight and knowledge there. All right, moving on. The next level of protection that we'll touch on is protection at the front end. Not a whole lot we can do here, but some things that we do want to pay attention to when we're working on front end. First and foremost is NPM and package managers, whether it's Yarn or whatever some of the old deprecated ones are. It's either NPM or Yarn these days. Be sure, if at all possible, spend a little bit of time to validate the authenticity of the packages that you install or require. Now, we can't be expected to validate everything in a dependency tree of every package that we use. That could become a full-time job in itself. But if you're picking a front-end package, whether it's a slider or a modal package or any number of front-end things, or if it's something that we're using within our build system with Gulp or Webpack or something like that, then take 5 minutes, go look at their repository, take a look at issues, see if issues are actually getting acknowledged and tracked. What's the track record on resolving those issues? Is the maintainer accepting and integrating pull requests for bug fixes? Look at how many times that package has been installed. Those 3 metrics are going to give you a good indicator as to whether that's going to be a quality package or not. Periodically audit your package.json file and make sure that all the packages you install are actually being used, whether that's in the front end or within your build system. And always try to keep your build tool dependencies as up to date as possible. We all get stagnant in our build systems. And if they work and we don't come back to a project for a while, they could be out there. It's going to build up more vulnerabilities. And the first time that you either install that project again on a new machine or run that build tool again after 3 months, it's going to start squawking at you and give you a whole bunch of deprecation and alerts of vulnerabilities that could be within your dependency tree. 2 no-brainers for forms. Don't expose unsanitized form input data to the front end. Usually don't output too much from a form to the front end without sanitizing it. And always sanitize all form input data before processing it within PHP or writing to your database. And assets, we mentioned that Craft does this by default for assets like SVGs that are uploaded to asset storage. But if you are outputting like raw SVGs or God forbid allowing a client to upload one that ends up getting output to a gallery or something like that, make sure that you're actually using a sanitized library because there can be malicious code within an SVG. So protection at the server level. All right, so SSL always. It's 2022. We're over halfway through the year. There's literally no excuse to not be running an SSL on your web application or keeping it valid or renewing it ahead of expirations and force HTTPS traffic for all traffic. They're free. Let's Encrypt certificates are free. They're relatively easy to install. Paid longer life auto renew certificates are not that expensive. If you've got a managed host, you can work out systems with them. You literally never touch it. It's going to auto renew, and your traffic is going to be secure. There's really no excuse to not have HTTPS for all traffic for your web application these days. No brainer. Cloudflare, not going to touch on this a little bit because I know Nevin's going to talk about Cloudflare and some of its risk mitigation opportunities, but layering Cloudflare over a Craft web application can really block a large amount of potentially malicious traffic before it even reaches your site, with the additional bonus of static CDN caching and its many funny named services that it offers for like speeding up JavaScript or image loading and things like that. So like I said, Nevin's going to touch on that a little bit here in just a minute. Just a couple security headers that whether you're using Apache or Nginx, you should usually try to configure to pass to your views for best security practices. Here's a screenshot of one of my Nginx configurations for a site that I'm running on Forge. So I always set my X-frame options to same origin to ensure that nobody can try to load the site in an iframe on another site. XSS protection is always set to 1 and block any XSS modes. And X content type options, I always say no sniff, so I don't allow visitors to come in and ask the server for, do you have this file or do you have this access or anything. It's just going to block it out of the box. Ben touched on this a little bit, but a lot of us are really good at keeping our craft site and our craft application up to date, but not the actual server. So you'll see in a non-managed host, it's really up to you to maintain that server, whether you're layering Forge or Server Pilot or something on top of it, or you're just maintaining it on your own. I have quarterly and monthly maintenance clients, and part of that maintenance is applying Ubuntu updates, package updates, and all of that as much as possible, because that stuff moves at 100 miles an hour, just like craft updates move at 100 miles an hour. So if your underlying base is not up to date, but what you're layering on top of it is up to date, you've already got a risk factor there on the server side of things. So a company like Arcustech that with Nevin is a managed host, and they're going to keep that server up to date for you as much as possible. All right, we're going to get a little more in depth here with CSP, Content Security Policy. So I've been applying this on a lot of clients over the last year, and a couple different approaches to how to manage it. But a CSP is an HTTP header that allows us to control the front end resources that the user agent is allowed to load for a given page. And that would be style sheets, web fonts, most importantly, JavaScript, sometimes images as well. With a few exceptions, policies mostly involve server origins and script endpoints. And it really helps guard against cross-site scripting attacks where someone would come in and try to load a malicious JavaScript. If we are specifying the only domains that are allowed to run script SRCs or web font SRCs or et cetera, then the browser is just going to not download those assets, and you'll see it within the console. It's going to say, nope, my image SRC doesn't have this URL in place, so I'm not going to allow this JavaScript to parse or this image to parse. This is kind of hard to see, but this is a client of SoulSpace's that is heavily marketed by tracking scripts, which is the nice way to say it. Every service that you can imagine, they are on board with. LinkedIn, TechTarget, Facebook tracking, DoubleClick tracking, Google Analytics, Bing. I mean, Hushly, the list just goes on and on and on. So they're at a high risk already because they're loading a ton of third-party JavaScript. So this screenshot is from the plugin that Ben manages that allows you to manage this within Craft Admin. It's really awesome because the client can come in and add it as needed. We can add it as needed. The one drawback to this is it's considered a setting. And so these values are tracked within project config. Because of this, we break our own rule with this client and allow them to mutate Craft schema on production so that they can manage adding these scripts in as they need. The drawback there is that they have to ping us on Slack and say, hey, we just added Akamai HD as a partner, and then one of us has to go in and add this within the schema. That way we don't overwrite these settings whenever we next push to the deployment. Not the best approach, and it's kind of been a thorn in my side for a while. While I researched this for this presentation, I came across this article, which I've linked here on bluecoastweb.com, with a really clever way of managing this. And they set up a matrix field and a global. Each of the matrix blocks corresponds to one of these SRC directives, whether it's script SRC or style SRC or font or frame or connect or one of those, and then allows the client or whoever to go in and add as many blocks as they need to add these directive rules and values in place. Then within markup, they either write out looping over this matrix as HTTP headers, or you can write these out as a meta tag. Then this is not tracked within project config, then you can really stick to a effective project config deployment workflow where you're not mutating schema on remote production. I didn't get into the details of this. I just thought I would link this here and at the end. But when I found this, I reached out to my partner developer that manages this, and I said, hey, let's get this into our workflow and let's switch out the use of CSP within Ben's plugin to do this, because this is going to allow us to further secure the site and not risk us overriding one of these directive values if we end up missing something or the client forgets to tell us that they've mutated the schema by adding an additional value within here, just a safety net. All right, without further ado, Nevin has been patiently waiting to take over the broadcast here. I've gotten to know Nevin pretty well over the last couple of months. A ton of respect for this guy. He's got years and years, decades of experience within IT. Nevin runs Arcustech, which is a very specialty craft hosting company, but also does regular VPS hosting and non-root access like Docker type servers. Nevin is going to discuss with us today security more at the server level. So Nevin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds good. How is everyone doing? I'm probably going to hammer into the same things that Ben touched on, and that is the biggest thing that you need to worry about from a security standpoint is updates. Be it Craft itself, probably more so realistically than actually the server level, but you need to keep everything updated. One of the biggest things we've seen issues with is I don't think a lot of people grasp the idea that the server is running an operating system. PHP is important to, say, a specific version of Craft. You need PHP 8 plus for Craft 4. Slapping in a new version of PHP on top of an outdated operating system is doable, but not recommended. We only run the version of PHP, MySQL, Apache, Nginx that Ubuntu ships with a specific LTS or a long-term support version of their operating system. The reason we do that is realistically, you know that there is a 5-year window that Ubuntu engineers are going to support each one of those services. If it's not supported by a specific technology group, they backport security. So PHP.NET group, they only support PHP versions for a 2-year window now. That's great, I think, for them, but realistically, how many people are going to be able to, how many web applications are going to not run into issues with, if you're running Craft 3 and you need PHP 7.2 plus, if they stop supporting 7.2, do you break the rule and actually upgrade PHP outside the operating system, or do you move to the next version of the operating system, which may have a PHP version 2 new for whatever you're running? Case in point is we have a lot of people who are still running Craft 2 sites. Craft 2 doesn't do really well at all past PHP 7.4. And so if you install Ubuntu 22.04, it's PHP 8.1. You're not going to be able to run a Craft 2 site on that. So we have a lot of people that get stuck in that rock and a hard place. You haven't updated the Craft 2 sites yet, and now you're running into the limit to that. You have OSs or PHP itself that isn't supporting a version of PHP anymore. So really keeping your software and your OS is up to date in a regular fashion is really key. Another aspect for basic security on a server is obviously SSH keys. From a physical security standpoint, especially being a lot of people use laptops, and I've seen a lot of people not really tend to lock their laptops or screens when they wander away, even in an office environment. They get used to it. And then I've seen people sitting at airports, they wander away for a couple of minutes with their laptop unlocked.
Oh, God.
All it takes is somebody wandering away with the laptop and not closing it. And while you have SSH keys on your system, do you set passphrases on your SSH keys? If not, that person now can wander through any of your tools and have SSH access to systems, because while you have SSH keys, if they hit a history of your SSH client or your editing tool for PHP code or whatever the case may be, it's going to automatically log you into a system without a password prompt. There's two ways of going about that. Obviously, when you generate your SSH keys, you can set passphrases on the SSH key. So you're prompted for the passphrase when the key is initiated to log into a system. The other way is most modern versions, I would guess in probably the last 5 years of OpenSSH on most servers, has the ability to use both an SSH key and a Linux password, both. So instead of requiring one or the other, it can require both. That tends to be a little extreme because a lot of services, I have run into a couple of Git services and a number of other tools that don't understand if you have an SSH key, there wouldn't be a password prompt. So you may want to test that before you actually implement it widely. But really, server security comes down to keeping the system up to date, making sure that you don't just follow some random tutorial on the internet that says, hey, if you want to install version X of PHP onto your old version of Ubuntu, follow these steps. Sure, your application might work, but the Linux kernel is probably out to date, and Nginx Apache may be out of date, could be vulnerable to a number of things. So really keep the OS up to date along with your scheduled stuff for Craft or whatever web application you're using. Another avenue that we recently have had a couple of clients, and actually there was just a discussion on the Craft Discord forums a couple of days ago. Someone had a client that wanted either two-factor or multi-factor authentication in front of the Craft admin login. If you actually have Cloudflare in front of your website, outside of all of the other services that it provides, from being able to either block or challenge based on even country codes, you have the ability to use, I believe it's free for up to 50 authenticated users, and that's individual users, not 50 authentication attempts. They have a tool called Access, which is part of their Zero Trust or sort of Teams stuff that they have recently been renaming. So it's a little fun to keep track of exactly where they've put a few things. But Access works on a number of different methods, but the easiest method is you can implement it using URIs. So /admin for Craft or whatever you've named Craft's trigger to. I usually recommend also looking at the URL parameter version that usually gets written out of URLs to also add that as a URI trigger. But it's basically Cloudflare will intervene and it pops up a login page. You can use either one-time email passcodes, you can link it to Gmail login, GitHub, a couple of different two-factor authentication services. There's a wide variety of authentication services that you can use, along with simply limiting anybody with email address at a certain domain or a list of email addresses. If they type the email address in, they will get sent an email with a one-time use passcode. Once they're authenticated through, they're going to see the normal Craft login. You can have that Craft or the Cloudflare access authentication last for a day, an hour, a month. It comes in quite handy. It adds an extra layer of protection, not only from automated tools, but just people hunting manually. If they know your site is running Craft, if you happen to leave the header information in that was talked about earlier, it gives you that capability of not only blocking people getting to the login, but it is also fully access logged. They're non-deletable logs. I believe at their free level, they do not keep it very long. I think it is only 30 days. The pay level, which is a couple dollars a month per user, they keep it for, I think it's a year, allowing you to actually track who has been authenticated, who hasn't. If you've got somebody that needs removal, you can remove them and invalidate any of their earlier tokens. So they will be kicked out of the Cloudflare access authentication immediately. The other aspects of Cloudflare that comes in for security access concepts is you can use it to sort of hone down where your customer's market is. We not long ago had a customer, I think they were in the Northeast US. They run a regional music festival every year, and they have ticket purchasing online. And their purchasing system got hammered with requests mostly coming from just random, a lot of it was China, Russia. Obviously, if the group is truly trying to hack into a system, doing IP or country code isn't going to help, but automated tools, it gets rid of things really easy. They basically went in and simply set Cloudflare to block any access from CN or RU. You could basically list any country, not including the United States, if you really have a regional website that these people are not going to have customers or visitors coming from random countries. Obviously, that works for any country. The other part is, if you're not sure, you can set Cloudflare to challenge them, either doing their normal browser check, which I believe uses a JavaScript to check if it's a not a real browser. There are some other challenge methods. They can pop up using a CAPTCHA as well. But it can fulfill, for some customers, it can fulfill a need that whack-a-mole doing IP blocking is not an easy thing to do, but if you can do it at a country level, that can actually make that a lot easier to do. And that's one of, an infinite number of different things that you could use on Cloudflare side. And I do know that a lot of people look at Cloudflare as, it's this single point of failure. And the reality is that there are so many single points of failure on the internet. Everything from your DNS servers do you use AWS versus, Amazon or any of the, Microsoft, they all have failure points. Anybody that's ever hosted anything in AWS's, whatever it is, US East 1 region probably has had downtime at some point in the last few months, weeks. Microsoft took out their own Azure cloud stuff 2 years in a row on pretty much the same day because of an internal SSL certificate that they use basically expired, and took down all of their backend communication for pretty much all of their APIs. There's 2 well-documented cases where I think that impacted most of Azure's services for up to 12 hours. I think that was the first time around. I think the second time around, it only took them like 6 hours to fix it. But whoever allowed the same certificate to expire 2 years in a row, and I think the last time that happened, they actually said I think they long-term fixed it, being they can, if it wasn't a self-signed certificate, Microsoft can commercially sign their own SSL certificates for trust. I think they set it for like 15 or 20 years, so that way it doesn't expire again. But you have to wonder why they were setting it for on an internal API communication channel, setting their own certificate to expire 2 years in a row and impacting clients was a large blunder. But again, the case in point is there's always going to be single points of failure. Most of the huge outages on the internet, even recently, have been caused by people fat fingering numbers into BGP tables, which is the global routing table for the internet. There are rare times that that's been done maliciously. Most of the time it's done accidentally. It's probably been 5 or 6 years now. I think there was a ISP in Pakistan that accidentally announced that they had authority over a set of IP addresses that were actually YouTube's. So most of the global traffic for YouTube actually slammed into this small ISP in Pakistan and not only flooded them, but killed YouTube traffic for most of the globe for quite a few hours, I believe. So I would not worry. The positives of using something like Cloudflare is loads, is a great step above the possible issues that Cloudflare occasionally may have an issue. Everybody has issues at some point in time. Obviously, there are other CDNs out there. Fastly is a good one. In that same price point, not quite as cheap because they actually do track data transmittal versus Cloudflare, which is it's per account. But I don't think they have quite of advanced functionality as the zero trust access information. There's a large number of services that Cloudflare keeps releasing that can come in handy. The only problem is it requires you to actually sort of keep on track of, wow, look at all these cool new features that they've actually released. We tend to watch anytime they release anything into beta. We tend to sign up for the beta just to check it out, what they're releasing, how it may impact us, our clients. On a developer level, that may actually be a good idea because a lot of the stuff they release really probably plays more into the developer side than the system administration side, but it all still is good information to have. And I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover.
That was excellent. And I will vouch tremendously for the power of Cloudflare, both from a CDN and page speed aspect, but more so its zero trust, its ability to quickly allow you to mitigate hack attempts, DDoS attempts, and things like that. I've personally have had clients that I've had to go back inside from the pool at 8 o'clock in the evening and block traffic from Korea. and from China because they were just getting hammered. And it's like a local bakery. Probably nobody from China is going to be trying to get 20,000 attempts at accessing the website for a local bakery. So, and of course, you could just turn it off after a day or two and let that traffic die down. But yes, thank you, Nevin. That was super insightful. Really appreciate your time coming on today and going over some of those topics for us. So, all right,
Thanks.
wrapping up here. Yeah, absolutely. So, all of the stuff that we talked about today, how do we then maintain this throughout the life cycle of our craft application? We've hammered this into, and I'm going to talk about it again, updates, and more updates. Currently, there is no PAS service that also keeps craft up to date for you automatically. You are definitely on the hook for keeping up with and running updates as needed in your craft application. There is a paid service called craft.report, and it can help monitor and email reports of needed updates, immediately notify you of critical updates. Probably not as handy for hobbyist developers, but for organizations like my group or some of the clients that I work with that manage 20, 30, upwards of 60 craft websites, it's virtually impossible to keep up with all of that and the versions that each of those craft sites are running. So signing up for the paid craft report service can really pay for itself quickly if you need to monitor versions for multiple craft sites. So backups. You should always try to automate backups of your database and at the minimum your uploaded assets. You can do that manually. I tend to lean towards connecting a backup tool, call it like a Nupal Backup, which is a paid craft plugin, and dumping those off on an automated schedule and putting them in S3. Works out of the box, can email you and let you know, hey, I finished for this month, this 15 days, this 7-day backup. Most importantly is occasionally test restorations of those backups, because if your backups don't actually work and you don't know how to apply them, then they are worthless and your efforts are useless there. So make sure that your stakeholders know how to access those backups, know how to apply those backups, and I would encourage every 6 months, run a drill where you apply one of those backups. You could make a backup and then 5 minutes later apply it. Tell your client stay out of the CMS for 5 minutes. We're going to test some stuff. Make a backup of the original. Try to apply that 5 minute ago backup. Make sure it works. Then periodic security scanning. So 2 tools that I use personally to run scans as part of like my maintenance packages for clients is securityheaders.com and Mozilla's observatory tool. Security headers really just checks to make sure that no new headers have been added that could be potentially vulnerable. And that would come from like Ubuntu updates, PHP updates, things like that. Observatory literally tests everything, whether it's security headers, when your SSL certificate's going to expire, is it auto renew? Do you have Cipher protocols in place? What are the strengths of those? Do you have HSTS preloading? Is it working? It's super awesome. So I would encourage working both of those into either your red flag drills that you could potentially work in every 6 months or something like that. Or if you're doing maintenance, have those run into your maintenance contracts when you do your quarterly, monthly maintenance on clients to stay on top of those. All right, some helpful craft plugins. We all know me, and I love craft plugins. That's what I love about craft too, is that they're out there and a majority of them are very, very good. And especially when it comes to security, Craft does, a lot out of the box that we talked about earlier, but there's quite a few really, really good Craft plugins that add additional functionality. Sherlock is the one that I was speaking about earlier that Ben runs. It can run full scans, kind of like Mozilla's tool, and can run them ongoing and email reports of that in the schedule that you would like to handle. It has 3 different levels. One's a free, one is a premium, and then there's a super premium level that's like $200. And that one will really help you mitigate issues. You can also manage your content security policy within it. Patrol is another one. Got a little scary earlier this year when Selvin, the developer, decided he was going to not maintain it anymore. I don't remember who it was, but another person in the Craft community took it over, picked up maintenance of it, and made it free, which you can deny, super good free plugins. But it will quickly turn on and off maintenance mode. So if you are not running like atomic deployments or something like that, and there's that little risk period where you're applying a composer update or something like that on a deployment, or your front end build is rebuilding or something like that, it can pick that up, turn on maintenance mode, turn it back off whenever the application is solid. It can also do smart HTTPS routing. Highly encourage that. Along the lines of what Nevin was talking about earlier, there are two-factor authentication plugins that can overlap to Craft's login. The one that I would highly encourage use of, and the one that's the most up-to-date, is literally called two-factor authentication. Hooks into any number of your authenticator applications. And honestly, they drive me crazy because I always forget, and I get to that second step and I'm like, oh, where's my phone? But I understand the benefits of it, and it really does outweigh. It's going to layer an additional hard to break layer of security onto your logins. Exactly what Ben and both Nevin talked about and I've talked about is that one of the riskiest things in our application is that we're allowing any number of people to log in and change content on the website and the server. So it's a big risk factor. Making that harder to log into may be annoying to some clients or customers or me, but it's just a fact of life when it comes to today's risk out there. Super easy. You just turn it on, tell it how many attempts you'll allow it to come in, and how long you're going to block somebody if their attempts don't work. 2 plugins to kind of further what word am I looking for? Further encourage help or quality passwords are password policy and enforced password. So both of those work basically the same, and they allow you to put in more strict rules to somebody's Craft user password. So they can't put, kitten 420 or something stupid like that. Like you got to have extra characters. Some of them even allow you to force phrases, which is kind of a new best practice when it comes to passwords. Is not just one set of strings. It's actually, like spam sandwiches, bean burrito or something like that. It's 4 terms with some spaces in it, and really sounds funny, but are very, very, very hard to break with a password breaker or encryptor. And then talked about this earlier, a Nupal backup. Is it on here? I don't think I have it in here because it's not really considered a security. Oh yeah, there it is. It's $49. I mean, think about how long it takes you to back up 25 Craft websites every quarter. Probably more than $49 because you get paid more than that per hour. So if you can offload that to a system that's going to run those backups and ensure that you can tell the client, yes, we're making weekly backups or we're making monthly backups. And it integrates with S3, Dropbox, Google Drive. It can even store them on your server. Not recommended to do that, but if you need to reduce costs, that's available. So out of all these plugins, those are the 6 that I usually, or 5. I usually pick either password policy or enforced password, one of the 2. But these are kind of my go-to security passwords if I'm scaffolding out a new site. Any of these other ones are awesome. Like have a client right now that we're going to be putting in digital download, and that allows us to secure the downloads of like CSV files that the client's going to be paying for, or that the users will be paying for, and making sure that only they are able to download the user level of access to those. And of course, you want to be running like reCAPTCHA 3 or SnapCHA or one of those if you are running forms on your site to further reduce spam. All right, so let's wrap up and share a couple links. So tonight we have gone over why security is important. It's you're the steward of whoops, I didn't even advance. I'm sorry. You guys got to like do the, hey, Justin. So we're the stewards of all the information that we want to collect from the user, whether it's their username and password or their, credit card information for purchasing, or just, collecting information to gather leads through Pardot. All of that, they're trusting us if giving us that information. It's our duty to make sure that data is secure in all of the things that we've talked about tonight. Craft out of the box gives you a lot of best practices and kind of free security, whether it's enabling and handling CSRF tokens out of the box, requiring lockout periods for bad logins, allowing us to configure the route to our admin, just any number of things that we've talked about tonight. All of those little practices will add up, whether it's security through obscurity or just like real security policies. All of those are going to just level up even farther Craft as a secure CMS system, which again, as Craft developers, we're up against WordPress. Well, WordPress is free. And, I can do this with WordPress and this, that, and the other, or Webflow or Adobe Experience Manager or whatever the next thing that's going to come out. We're up against that as competition. If you're specializing in Craft, you really have to sell Craft as a quality solution. For an enterprise client, security is going to be the number one thing that they're looking for. We talked about the different levels that you can apply protection and security, whether it's the configuration level, the application level, the front end level, or the server level. We talked about some services and best practices to maintaining security and scanning for future vulnerabilities. I showed you a couple helpful Craft plugins, and now we're getting into the links. So, of course, nobody's going to write these down, but these are either articles that I referenced within the slide deck here. You'll see I've got a lot of Ben's articles on here, securing your Craft website, part 1, 2, and 3, stepping up some security with with Sherlock. The importance of website security. This is a great article that kind of gives you a lot of business speak to try to sell solutions like Cloudflare or backups to your client, or even at the minimum, a maintenance contract, which surprisingly is kind of hard to convince some clients to spend the money on it, and just some stuff like Composer, security hardening, the actual list from Craft's knowledge base about security, which we talked about at the front. And I linked the CVE details website where you can kind of keep an ongoing log and look at vulnerabilities that have been reported and logged and how quickly Craft turns those around. So thank you again to Soulspace for feeding us tonight, and Ray Ward for hosting us at their beautiful offices here on the west side. Next meetups. So no meetup in September because I will be prepping for .all, where I will be presenting as one of the speakers. I'm almost done with my slide deck and not finishing it the night before the presentation, which has been my ongoing ritual here for these meetups. But that should be an awesome event. If you can convince your employer to pay you to spend a couple days in New York City and Brooklyn. Highly encourage it. In October, I'm going to come back and review what all was announced and some of the best presentations at .all 2022. I hear rumor of the announcement of the real release date of Craft Cloud, which is pretty exciting because that's going to be their hosting solution. Location and date is going to be determined for the October meetup. In November, we're going to have Ben on again as a remote guest to talk about caching and CDN strategies for optimal site speed, really diving deep into how to integrate Blitz, the awesome stuff of Blitz, and then a couple of the gotcha things, which I kind of touched on tonight, like refreshing CSRF tokens or any other number of dynamic data that you might need to interject on each page load. But we'll really talk about how the pairing of a static caching solution along with integrating a CDN can result in just blazing fast site speed. And then December is going to be our holiday party. Location and date to be determined, but more than likely I will be renting some space at a local brewery, probably going to be Friday, December 2nd. And we're going to have Andrew Welch in person. Andrew's a well-known craft developer, plugin maintainer, knowledge sharer, weightlifter, very strange beard grower. Awesome guy. And Andrew's going to come and we're going to have like a fireside chat with himself and I about running craft specific businesses, whether it's the kind of work that Andrew does where it's more of a craft advisory and plug-in business, and business like I run where you really specialize in craft as a developer and a consultant. I'll be catering that with barbecue that I'll make that everybody loves, and then I'll have some drink tickets for everybody afterwards at whatever brewery that we'll end up at. So that should finish out a solid year of craft meetups. And that's it. So thank you. Thank you, Nevin, again for spending time with us this evening. Really appreciate your time and your insight. And everybody have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.